When you hold a strong opinion, it probably feels, on some level, like a reasonable one. Not just reasonable for you specifically, but reasonable in a more general sense, the kind of position that most thoughtful people, if they considered the evidence carefully, would probably end up sharing. When you encounter someone who thinks very differently, there's a good chance you interpret their view as the result of something, a bias they haven't noticed, information they're missing, or an unwillingness to think it through. Your position is the sensible one. Most people would agree with you. This is not a description of an unusual personality type. It is a description of how almost everyone thinks about almost everything, almost all the time. And it is a significant cognitive error. Psychologists call it the false consensus effect, and it is one of the most consistent and consequential biases in the study of human social cognition. The core pattern is straightforward. People systematically overestimate the degree to which others share their beliefs, preferences, behaviors, and values. You think more people agree with you than actually do. You think your habits are more common than they are. You think your way of reacting to situations is more typical than it turns out to be. And you do this across essentially every domain of your mental life, without awareness and without it ever feeling like a bias. It simply feels like an accurate read of social reality. The original research was conducted in the 1970s by Lee Ross and colleagues at Stanford University. In one experiment, participants were asked whether they would walk around campus wearing a sandwich board bearing the message, "Eat at Joe's." Some agreed, others declined. Both groups were then asked to estimate what percentage of fellow students would make the same choice they had. The results were revealing. Those who agreed estimated that the majority of others would also agree. Those who declined estimated that the majority would also decline. Each group saw their own choice as the normal one. Each group interpreted the other group's choice as unusual and often attributed it to distinctive personality traits. The same decision, interpreted through opposite social lenses, with each side confident it represented the actual consensus. The effect has been replicated across a remarkable range of contexts: political beliefs, dietary choices, moral judgments, religious views, consumer preferences, interpersonal habits, and risk tolerance. It appears consistently across cultures and age groups. It is not a product of low intelligence or poor education. It occurs in people who are thoughtful, experienced, and well-informed about the world. What it reflects is something structural in how the mind constructs its sense of social reality, not something correctable by simply becoming more careful or more reflective about your own thinking. One major driver is the nature of social environments. You tend to spend time with people who are similar to you, sharing your background, your values, and your reference points. This is not a deliberate arrangement. It is the natural gravitational pull of social life. But it means your immediate environment genuinely skews toward your views. The people around you probably do agree with you more than the general population would. Your brain, sampling from the social world it has direct access to, draws a reasonable inference from a systematically biased sample. It concludes your views are broadly shared because in the social world you actually inhabit day to day, they often genuinely are. The error is not in the inference itself. It is in assuming, without examination, that your sample represents the much wider population beyond it. A second driver is cognitive. When you hold a belief or preference, you have full access to all your reasons for holding it. The arguments feel compelling. The evidence seems clear and substantial. If you arrived at this conclusion through such apparently sound reasoning, it seems natural that others, working from similar information, would arrive at the same place. What you cannot easily access is the genuinely different starting material that produces different conclusions in other people. The different formative experiences, the different weighting of values, the different information environments that lead other thoughtful people somewhere else entirely. The false consensus effect has real consequences that extend beyond social miscalibration. It shapes how people communicate and attempt to persuade. If you assume your audience already shares your view, you stop providing the foundational reasoning that would actually move someone who genuinely doesn't. Political discourse is consistently marked by this error. Advocates speaking as if their conclusions are self-evident, baffled by opposition that seems inexplicable from inside their own assumed consensus. The persistent sense that the other side is irrational or acting in bad faith often reflects not actual irrationality on their part, but the false consensus effect operating invisibly on this one. It also shapes self-evaluation in subtle but significant ways. If your behaviors and beliefs feel normal because you assume they're widely shared, you lose the corrective feedback that genuine social comparison would provide. Habits that are actually unusual don't register as unusual. Attitudes that are specific to your circumstances don't feel particular. The person who overestimates how common their own behavior is ends up with a weaker signal for recognizing when something in their life might be worth examining more carefully. There's a related pattern that operates as an asymmetric mirror. When people behave in ways they consider admirable, they tend to overestimate how commonly others share that behavior. When they behave in ways they consider less admirable, they also tend to overestimate how common it is, this time in a self-protective direction, normalizing what might otherwise feel like personal failings. Both patterns serve the same underlying function, maintaining the self-sense of being a reasonable and typical representative of the social world. Reducing the false consensus effect requires something genuinely effortful, treating your own perspective as one data point among many rather than a reference standard for the whole. Not performing that intellectually, but actually feeling the epistemic weight of it in practice. When you find yourself assuming that most people would obviously agree with you, the useful response is not necessarily to doubt your own view, but to become genuinely curious about why careful and intelligent people don't share it. The answer to that question is almost always more revealing and more instructive than the original assumption of consensus ever managed to be. The feeling of broad agreement is comfortable. It positions you at the center of the social world rather than at one particular point within it. But comfort and accuracy are different things, and this particular comfort comes at a real cost, both to understanding others and to understanding yourself.